Okay, here's the actual IRS Poison Bomb that we were talking about the components of in a different video. The idea is to put issues into your collective due process hearing that poison everyone who touches it. So, okay, first place, let's go over here. I'm in law.cornell.edu. Then I went into Constitution and Codes, and I made my way over to 26 U.S.C. Section 7214, Offenses by Officers and Employees of the United States. And this is unlawful acts of revenue officers or agents, and any officer or employee of the United States acting in connection with any revenue law of the United States who, one, who's guilty of any extortion or willful oppression under color of law. So in other words, willful oppression is unjust use of force or authority. It's like every single one of them does that. And who knowingly demands other or greater sums than are authorized by law. We've been over that issue before, that there is no liability statute. It's an excise tax. It's on privileges. And you don't, your right to life is not a privilege. So therefore, any demand that they make would be violating this subsection of 7214. Here's the one that's going to go with those Freedom of Information Act requests. Who, with an intent to defeat the application of any provision of this title, fails to perform any of the duties of his office or employment. So the FOIAs are designed to find out what their duties are and whether they, in other words, we know what their duties are, and now we're going to find out through the FOIAs whether or not they did them. And this includes your collection due process hearing officer herself. Okay, let's get down here a little more. And then the collection due process hearing officer has got to make a finding that all the steps have been followed. She doesn't know what the steps are, but she's supposed to have made a statement. She's supposed to make a paper. It's actually supposed to be a ruling on your collection due process. The Treasury Inspector General said that she was supposed to rule on all of your issues, and part of that ruling she was supposed to say that all of the steps have been followed. Well, you know what I think? I don't think anybody knows what all the steps are, and certainly not a harried, overworked, overburdened collection due process hearing officer. So right here, when she says all the steps have been followed, the FOIAs are created to nail down the fact that that's a false statement. So what I propose doing is that you get it in so that you could suspend the collection activity. You get your collection due process hearing request in timely so that you can get collection activity suspended. And then send in those Freedom of Information Acts. Get requests. Then get the responses back, and then take what you learned from the responses, take the responses, put the requests with responses, and then put an addendum to your collection due process hearing request. And what you're going to do is you're going to accuse those who are trying to collect a tax from you of this crime of unlawful acts of revenue officers or agents, or just an offense, right? And then what that's going to do is that's going to put her on notice. Now watch this in 8. And this is a crime too. This is a subsection. It's a crime right under 7. Who, having knowledge or information of the violation of any revenue law by any person or fraud committed by any person against the United States. So now, as soon as you send in, I think that you probably should do it via affidavit. You should put in your sworn statement that you did send in the Freedom of Information Act request, and that this is the response that you got back, and it demonstrates that such and such a person, whoever it was that did the act, you should be able to learn that from the FOIA request itself. And if you don't, then you have to formulate another FOIA request to find out who it was that, did something wrong or didn't do something they were supposed to. Under any revenue law, that's what we're talking about. So we could be under 6203, the assessment the statute that requires that there be an assigned assessment and that you're entitled to a copy of it. Who fails to report in writing such knowledge or information to the Secretary. Okay, so If we give the appeals officer notice of this, and then the appeals officer has the knowledge, and now she's supposed to report it to the secretary. So what we would do is give her the knowledge, and then send a Freedom of Information Act request to the secretary themselves, Secretary of the Treasury, and you say there, hey, did my appeals officer give you any information about a crime having been committed by IRS agents? And then you know what you're going to do? You're going to find out that your appeals officer didn't do what she was supposed to because she probably never read this law, and you're going to get her in trouble. Now, once you're her accuser on a crime, this crime right here of 7214A8, then that makes her no longer impartial. Now she's got to get off the case. Now your new appeals officer is going to come on, and she's going to see the record that, oops, the one before me got busted, and all of a sudden they're not going to want to talk to you. That's the whole point about this poison issue, because once they realize that this guy is coming after anybody who touches this case on a criminal accusation, then they're not going to want to participate. And then we go down here. I talk about this: fine not more than $10,000, in prison not more than 5 years. So the stakes are right up there, and this is a very important part of a poison bomb. Now let's go to the other part of it. What we're looking at here is Section 1203 of the IRS Reform and Restoration Act in 1998. And it says the Commissioner of Internal Revenue shall terminate the employment of any employee in Internal Revenue Service if there's a final administrative judicial determination such employee committed any act or omission described in subsection B in the performance of the employee's official duties. Such termination shall be removed for cause on charges of misconduct. And then here's acts or omissions. Subsection B3, with respect to a taxpayer, taxpayer representative, or other employee of the Internal Revenue Service in violation of any right under the Constitution of the United States. Now, if you read that Tommy Cryer brief, you're going to find out in there that he talks about your right to life. And you have it talks about in the Fifth Amendment, it says that you have a right to life, liberty, and property, and you cannot be deprived of any of that without due process of law. Well, your right to life includes your right to go out and keep a roof over your head by earning money and feeding yourself and your family and so forth. That's all a right. They can't tax your right. So what that means is you've got them all busted under the Constitution if you know what your rights are. Another one would be deprivation of due process of law, because the statutes say, hey, due process is what the statute tells you to do. And if they don't do what it says, then they've deprived you of due process. So those are some issues that you can bring up, and the whole point is to get them terminated. That's why it's called the IRS Terminator Package. All right, and then, let's see, B6. It shows here that they can also be terminated for violations of the Internal Revenue Code in 1986, Department of Treasury regulations or policies of the Internal Revenue Service, including the Internal Revenue Manual. And that's what those FOIAs are designed to do, is to ferret out and find out whether they follow the provisions of the manual, the code, the regulations. And then it goes on, for the purpose of retaliating against or harassing a taxpayer. It looks to me like all they have to do is not follow the deal, and it turns into harassment. In other words, as soon as they don't do what the law requires them to do, it is harassment. So at any rate, this is the poison bomb component of the Terminator, the IRS Terminator package.